Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to take part with the Sydney Hainan GP Support Network in a visit to Haikou in Hainan, China, for their GP training conference. I went with three of our colleagues, Michael Burke, Carolyn Russell and Patricia Chan. And so I wanted to just reflect on what was happening there and what happens with our GP training here. So looking at this, China is the chicken, Hainan is the egg under the chicken, and Haikou is the city that is closest to mainland China. It's really the financial hub of the place there. Okay, it's a very beautiful place, but general practice training is really still fledgling in China. It varies according to the province, and it has no standardised barrier like what we have with our RACGP exams. In fact, this GP training conference that we were involved in is not the norm. The community remembers the barefoot doctors and they lack trust in their GPs. So the GPs actually are working from hospital clinics and private practice just doesn't exist at this point. That's Haikou People's Hospital and that's where the GP training is based where we were. Here, the GPs there were telling me that their income is very, very low. They have a flat rate per patient regardless of the content of the consult. Most doctors see huge numbers of patients, so they were on the fourth floor of this hospital. The clinics are allocated according to what they are, ED on the floor, GP, ENT, dermatology on the top floor. So the patient has to intentionally go up all the escalators to find the GP clinic, which creates another barrier. But medicine is still very much the same. The big thing was that they were keen to learn from GPs. In China, the doctors move into a specialty training immediately after graduation. They don't have access to experienced GP educators. So they really were keen to practice holistic primary care medicine. In this particular GP training practice, they had just recently set up the technology to do video consults. And that's their room. They were very proud of that, enabling the trainees to review and reflect on their consultation skills. This was still very new, very novel. They'd had less than a handful of registrars actually use it, but were thrilled with what was going on there. At this conference, we had quite a mix of delegates. So we had specialist doctors who were wanting to train as GPs. We had specialist doctors who would be training GPs. We had political and financial stakeholders there as well because of the structure. And most of the people there were used to standard lecture style teaching. So of course we brought in standard lecture style teaching, but with translators. Everything was translated across in the way that we did that. We needed to add to their GP training content, but also to encourage and resource the GP educators in Hainan. We introduced the idea of small groups. This was quite interesting in the feedback. One trainee said, "What is more, everyone is involved in the training experience in small round groups. I've never seen this before." She was actually a geriatrician. So we got the interactive collaboration between the doctors. Okay. The Aussies are always very easy to spot because we're always leaning into our interpreters, trying to listen. Tim up the top there, who's interpreting for me, is actually a Canadian who has been very key with building the GP training in Hainan. We introduced them to the idea of using role plays. How to use a role play, how to adopt a role. If you see there, our doctor has a stethoscope, our patient has a tie. And we were trying to show them how to then take it off and step out of role. And then we ran it with a few things. That was sexual history taking, actually. We showed how we work as a team, and as a result, we were ready to step in and demonstrate what we were doing. Here, the skills were using visuals, patient-friendly language to explain asthma to the patient. Carolyn was actually running the session and then suddenly asked me, as one of the delegates, to come up and demonstrate how I might explain it to the patient, but then immediately broke down barriers so that others would have a go. These are things that we know. We encourage them to have hands-on practice. They have never seen peak flow meters. So we got peak flow meters and they learnt how to use that. Every delegate engaged with the learning, and this was a really novel concept in the way that their learning had been there. We gave opportunity for practice of skills. This was actually explaining to a patient how to use a peak flow. And what we used was Gabrielle, who was one of our GP trainees in Hainan, so that she was going around as the patient. That enabled the delegate to speak in their first language, and it also took the foreign educator and put them in the back picture and was less threatening. We looked at technology. Technology, of course, is a big part of modern day China. Everybody has at least a smartphone. Mind you, they don't have GP software. No medical director, no Praxsoft. They have Word documents on a desktop. That's it. So we were looking at simple tools that they could use and they could create, and resourcing them that way. We were stepping in with them and then engaging them again in the teaching. Here I was pretending to have an asthma attack and showing how I used my puffer, totally incorrectly, and we were then going from that to how do you educate the patient. You actually need to show. You don't just give a resource, you need to engage with them. We had demonstrations where we actually got them out of their seats and up the front. Again, it was that engagement with each of the delegates there. But of course, we had to keep listening, so we only got a certain amount of that feedback at the time. We got an awful lot later on. Interestingly, that language barrier did not impede our communication because we'd used so many of these other interactive manners. And so I found that this was a really interesting look here. In our environment in Australia, we are finding registrars who are very exam focused. They are already talking about what do I need to know to get through the exam. Here, they didn't have that exam focus. The hunger was to learn practical skills that could be implemented immediately in their situation. They kept saying to me they want to be excellent GPs. So I felt challenged to not compromise how we do our education in response to exam pressure and logistics and all the numbers of registrars, but to remember the principles of quality learning and teaching and engagement of our registrars. Thank you.